Hello, recorder.
We have to like an intro song or something to help us bring ourselves in.
Right. Do 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 do. Oh.
It's like Frasier.
I've never seen Frasier. Um, all right. Well, now that the third invisible is here, shall we get started?
Hmm. Check-ins, a
Yeah.
breath.
Um, yeah. Let's do a little breath sync up. That's nice. So, do you want to go first, or shall I?
I'll go first.
Cool.
Um, Before the recording started, I did a drawing. I guess you weren't here yet either, but it was Princess of Discs, so our old friend.
She
Um,
just keeps coming up.
so it speaks about that material, grounded, um, almost impregnated possibility on the material realm, which feels good for the space. And the Wheel of Fortune, which is pretty much, what's going to happen is going to happen. So you're in a experience of fate and valor.
Hmm.
So this is a seven. So seven's oftentimes not great, but the Seven of Wands, for me, valor talks about leadership that comes through true selflessness. Um, and there's a quality of almost like that Wheel of Fortune quality where you can't but help do what you do, and by doing it true, like, in a true way, you become a leader. Versus like a online leadership class where you learn some basic management skills, or you learn qualities of leaders, and it's not actually aligned to the ethos or your particular form, like who you are as a person in the world.
Yeah.
Um, but I think for my check-in, these cards, I I feel full of possibility, and I feel empowered by that. And I feel like there's not an area of my life right now where I am not willing to claim that, to own that, to be in a relationship with myself in a way where um, I let the external decide for me. This is harder than I thought it was going to be. I find myself trying to figure out what to talk about because the space actually doesn't feel like it needs to be about, Ka and I, and in some ways the experience is so close that it's hard to speak to it from like a meta perspective. Um, what I find really reassuring is that I feel more right. I feel more aligned. Um, so I guess my check-in is that I have a really deep relationship with power. Um, I used to use the language a lot about how someone had power over me and about how power is being applied to me in the work and my relationships and my family at system levels. And there wasn't a real sense of my own relationship to power based on inner authority and inner structures that I was creating that allowed for decisions and choices to be made within myself in relationship to the larger world. In the last few months, that ability to scaffold an inner structure that allows for decision making to happen from a place of empowerment while not losing a deep sense of what is being asked of and being spoken to um, in the like larger context or field. Actually recognizing sometimes that that ability to sense those things is part of the power structure itself. Um, and so in, today in my relationship, um, after a really long time of knowing and not knowing what to say, or knowing and being afraid of the consequences, or um, just the balance of knowing and waiting. Uh, I, I just um, used the power that I had to reshape or recraft what Ka and I are in. And I don't want to, I know I'm taking a lot of space right now, and I'm aware of that. And I was on a call yesterday, and Jeanne, who I was talking to, I was telling her about this deep pain that I was in process with. And I know I've like known it my entire life, and it keeps kind of coming back up, and it's like an existential pain. Um, and I talked about how that shows up in relationship. we talked about how, cause my partner had a lot of gifts to give, but that existential pain was one that only I really knew. And that because I made a commitment to being in relationship with it, that meant I had picked a very, I don't know, special life, I guess. And we talked about our relationship and how we orient toward that thing, that existential wound, or that I see it as darkness sometimes, like a very dark purple. And so what I talked to Kyle about today was the fact that what I am, what I feel, is I feel the wholeness of his love, without a doubt. As a partner, he is able to show up in a way that is, for him, this wholeness, this completeness, and it feels that way. It's a deep devotion, and my experience of the gap that still existed. So as I've learned and felt so many gifts from his love and all the ways that it shows up, there is something that I feel inside of me that I knew he didn't know or understand. And the decision was to take this power of knowing this thing and to name it and to really put it there and hold it firmly, as just being true for me, and I think true in our relationship, and allowing it to inform where we go from here. Is this making sense?
It's making something. Mostly sense.
Maybe we'll cut this part out. I don't know either.
I mean, my comment wasn't meant to cause you to stop, right? It was like, it's making sense and it's making something more, and that I was recognizing you're going through a deeply personal experience of expressing and moving through and deepening your understanding of this experience through articulation. So it's making sense, and there's parts that don't make, there's a deeper part that doesn't make sense because it can't make sense, right? But it's still really beautiful to witness and see, allow you to speak into that and move into that. So please continue if you would like.
It feels like Wheel of Fortune, not the game show, but the card. It's like, it's like, who or what am I in relationship with in this life? And just, I guess, when I look at the structure that has allowed for today to happen, it's it feels like a decision in that too. I remember in our Essen Taye, she said, Justin, your relationship with God, not man. Like, you're not meant to answer or be guided by any man, simply God. And um, as I've like tried that perspective on, it it does something to uh, the individuals that I find myself in relationship with and myself in different environments. Um, so to not think about this relationship or even Ka as something that is, yeah, I'm not so clear on that either. I'm gonna stop. I know I'm being kind of self-conscious, and I feel that in myself, and I feel like a level of vulnerability, and I feel a desire to have like a consistent and clear train of thought and understanding. And um, and as I listen to myself, I don't feel that I do. Um, and I'm trying to tackle some really big ideas, and um, maybe I can, yeah, stop here and see if these things actually find greater content or context as we move through a conversation, versus a one-sided monologue.
Have I told you the story of Sophia?
Uh,
It's a good one. Um, so Sophia's a she's like a she's a Christian figure actually, but she basically got cut out of neo Christianity, um, because we couldn't have any powerful female figures. That's a no go. But she's in the creation of Adam. So like God's creating Adam, and he's like got his arm around Sophia. Um, but so the myth of Sophia that I was told is really beautiful, and I want to share it. And so basically, it's that so in the beginning, right, all was one, right? Everything was one with God, and then there was a schism, and the schism occurred, and Sophia finds herself separated from God, right? And so disoriented and distressed, she starts searching around and looking for God in the blackness, and she sees his light, right? She sees his light, and it's so far away, and it's like she's like, okay, I can make it there, and so she starts traveling towards the light of God, and she travels for eons, billions and billions of years, right? Time eternal, and at last she finally reaches the light. And when she gets there, she realizes that what she was moving towards, this light, was not the light of God, but the reflection of God's light in the deepest, darkest part of the universe, as far from God as she could possibly be. And so her grief in that moment created the physical world. And so, it's this beautiful story that, I mean, I find it beautiful
mhm.
in that there's an inherent existential grief of being physical, right? Of coming into this world, and it's the separation from the divine, right? And we feel it very acutely in some more than others, but like that's the foundation foundation of our 3D world, right? Is this existential pain.
The wheel of we don't have a name for it, but the wheel is coming to mind, that conversation from 2 times ago. But just the inherent wounding and also our process of coming into relationship with that in some way. And then what that looks like out in the world, if it goes that far. Or, yeah. Do you want to, is that your check-in?
Yeah, yeah. I think I've got a pretty mellow check-in. I'm just kind of chilling. Uh, Journey School was supposed to happen this weekend. It got postponed till next weekend, which I'm happy about because I wanted like a day to, I need like a couple days to kind of catch up on some stuff and clean my house and go do my laundry and like, just kind of general life keeping things. And so I'm happy that I can have this weekend to do that. And I'm interested to see what comes up from this this conversation. It feels very ripe. Are you all right if I set a context or suggest
Yeah,
a context?
for sure.
So, last week, sort of towards the end of the call, I realized that we were unintentionally moving through the process that we described in the first call. Or unintentionally, intentionally, right? However it is. But it was like, so last week we were exploring this bridge between like South and West, right? Okay, like here's like what we've been trying to do, right? We were talking about like all the like we tried to do this and like here's how it went wrong, right? We tried to do this and like here's how we fucked it up and like here's all the things like we fucked up in like doing this thing, right? So we were talking about kind of this like exploring these like not necessarily, I don't know, not necessarily fuck ups or errors or mistakes, although you can call them that if you want, but it was just basically the ways in which our attempts to manifest this process have fallen short of fallen short of what we hoped they would be. And and then I left last week with a question, which was just basically like, okay, what intrinsic wounding, it was something along the lines of like, what intrinsic wounding is there for us, and how is that causing us to live out these, or to not be able to manifest this in the ways that we're hoping, and what gift is there, right? I think you also requested to add in the like, well, what gift is there, right? Like, what is the power in that wound? And I didn't take time to the week to like sit down and really reflect on it, but it was rumbling around in my mind, and it's a challenging question, and I didn't get like a clear answer. Like nothing was like, oh yeah, like that's it. But it seems like we've already like set the context for this call to like, let's dive into like wounding. So I think that's kind of what we need to do.
Yeah. I also didn't actively contemplate the question. So that can be what we do here in some way.
Yeah.
I thought about too just additional context of the Princess of Discs. So you're talking about how um, so the discs are also about lessons. So they're like a material manifestation of lessons, and so our fuck ups and our failures um, are actually pinnacles. They're like part of the money bag in some ways, and um, I think that's a really interesting way to think about that energy. Um, how you're gaining like a wealth or access to prosperity through lessons learned over time.
Yeah. And to me, that does, like, I don't know totally where it falls on the medicine wheel, but it seems like it could fall in that transition of like west to north, right? Is like it's that recognition of like what gifts are in the, are in the wounds.
So one thing that comes to mind is in the gene keys.
Yeah.
So a system of self-knowledge that uses kind of like a poetic synthesis of a couple of different disciplines, including alchemy and the I Ching and Kabbalah and human design and a few others. They have a golden path. And so there's three sections: activation, which is pretty much your purpose, love, which is the Venus sequence. So it's about how do you, particularly in your primary relationships, but all relationships, what's the developmental pattern for how you are in relationships and what you're there to learn. And then you go into the Pearl, which is about prosperity. But the bridge between relationships and kind of love and prosperity and work and service is the core wound itself. So the vocation is the core wound, and the core wound is the vocation. And um, for me, mine's patience. So the movement of the shadow of impatience to the city or the awakened state of timelessness through patience.
Yeah.
And my kind of keynote or line is philanthropy. So it's about investing in things that align to my ethics and values in a diversity of ways in order to see them grow. Um, and it's holding this perspective of um, trying not to distort or lose the principles, the higher order principles, in the production or in the marketing. How well can we streamline, um, or at least where I sit is looking at the developmental process of an idea or a concept or um, a I guess any type of a form and making sure that it's aligned to his ethos as an example, right? Like that the distortion there is as minimal as possible, um, as much as possible. When I look at, well, maybe I'll pause there before going to like a story. Yeah.
Did you looked at my gene key in like the last week, right?
Yeah.
Do you
Do I
remember
know?
what do you remember what my core wound was? I know, like I've looked at my gene key, but like I didn't really understand it too well, and it was like years ago.
Mm, I did look at it, and I don't remember. Um, and this is going to be a search, so I'm mad right now. why why I brought patience up, and that kind of characterization of a wound is one that I don't think people often think about impatience as being like a core wound of coming into the human body.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know how often, or I have found myself contemplating all the ways that wound becomes manifest in my life. Um, so a lot of my failures in the past have been really interestingly related to that wounding pattern, which is a bit of impatience, wanting something to already be there and feeling like I failed because it's not yet, um, and not really having a great sense of the time that it does take, um, and not even all the time, even not even being able to. It's like the, the shadow is something that you can see sometimes to work with, but most of the time you don't see it until you're able to look back. So I think about all of our failures feel like they are, I could say they're, in part due to my impatience, but then that same perspective applied to like a timelessness goes, well, that's simply not true. We haven't even failed yet. We're still in this long multi-year process, and um, there's actually been a really deep patience to us working together um,
Yeah.
over time and space, and um, that movement or that ability to take what feels like a shadow pattern or that is the shadow pattern, and to um, I don't know, kind of create like a resting place or a place of application for work, and uh, actually highlight it. 'Cause I feel like the way that we have, um, the way we've gone through our, I keep wanting to like um, collapse within myself. Uh, it's a really challenging feeling, Peter.
Right now in this conversation.
Hmm.
Um, do you want to explore that?
Um, in some ways, it's a looking for like very right words and not having access to them, or hearing what I'm saying and feeling that the not being able to like keep the string or the coherence going for myself. And so there's like it's like a spark of inspiration, a topic or a concept or an idea that's seen, and I think normally I would just extrapolate about it. Um, and that capacity to just freely flow with words or concepts and have it come about in a full circle way isn't here. And so I'm um, almost wrestling with like a speech pattern because I don't have that uh, here. And so how do I speak or how do I um, uh, show up in this conversation, and not like not fold in. Um, there's like a real deep silence. Um, which isn't very interesting.
Silence can sometimes be the most interesting. The thing that came up for me when you were speaking is like, so, um, with a core wound of patience, right? To like, uh, what was coming up for me was that it's not this like idea that things have to take long, right? It's this concept of like a core wound of patience for me would signify trying to do things not at the opportune time, right? So not being able to ride the waves of the universe, right? Being out of sync with the waves of the universe. And um and so it's not like you have to, you always have to wait like, you know, years or months or hours or whatever. Sometimes it's just like it's just moments, but it's being able to uh, have that awareness of when your energy will be supported and when you're fighting against the tide. That makes sense.
Mhm.
Um,
and,
yeah.
and I can see it as I imagine there's timing when you would want to jump into something or onto something. Um, there's also like catching a wave. There's also timing, which is like seasonal. So maybe it takes 3 years for an apple tree to start bearing fruit. But if you don't know that, you'll assume that the all your trees are barren, or you may give up really early. And so there's
Yeah.
this, yeah,
Well, and
it's
one,
almost like
one
a
of my,
nurturing.
I saw a talk from a biodynamic farmer. Uh, it was like in the middle of January or something. And he was like, there's that old phrase that like the best time to plant a tree is 10 years ago. Second best time is right now. He's like, that's the stupidest uh, quote ever, because right now is not the best time to plant the tree. Plant a tree right now is going to die. Right? So don't plant a tree in the middle of January when there's a foot of snow on the ground.
Hmm. So I'm thinking about like time, and I'm looking at cycles. I'm looking at this particular occurrence of a core wound, although it's not um, probably with the only way the fracture looks or the only way the wound does look. But I think about as you're, let's say, whether you're planting for the first time or you're, waiting for it to grow and you're kind of cultivating it and caretaking for it. Um, how you still move through. We mentioned this in the first video, I think, from ethos to form to shadow to evolution. So it's not just being at the beginning of a new venture, but also an iterative process that people go through. And so I'm kind of looking at maybe the seasonal cycles as an example of like as like a similar type of movement within an organization. So if I'm 1 year old and I've seen my first full year, Maybe I have felt a summer and a winter. Um, but also a veteran organization may come to a place where, like, you know, it's the winter of their organization. Like there's a death happening there or something like that. Not that winter's always death, but there's that quality to it. And so for someone like me as an example, or for those that may understand or feel that relationship to impatience and patience, um, as you're navigating the wheel, uh, I imagine that time and the context of times would be a really well, like, relevant um, tool or resource or like compass to what you're in.
Yeah.
Um, and that could be something, I think this is maybe taking it a little bit too far, I wonder, but like even within your own personal age. So there's like a founder narrative about the 21-year-old tech startup or whatever it is, right? The founder. But I think on average, the venture-backed founders are in their 40s. Like that's the highest population. That's where the most success actually happens. Um, don't quote
Well,
me
if you
on.
call it, yeah, if you call venture backing success, but sure.
Agreed. Um, but maybe what I'm pointing to more is the um, by 40, the narrative goes that you've failed enough times to be ready for success. Um, and you know what to do with money. And so taking a more formal financial backing route like venture capital makes a lot of sense, possibly.
Yeah.
Um, so as like a 28-year-old, my capacity to understand patience and to understand impatience as a wound and the creative process moving across this wheel are uh, one, the wheel is new, so that was a process of patience. Or it's been a cultivation or culmination of years of work. But also at 28, I can kind of sit back and go, well, hopefully I have a few more seasons to my life. And maybe a lot of the pressures I feel um, to uh, to know or to create or to understand, maybe I can relate to them differently as long as I know I have something that I'm moving through. Um, and I can always come back to that or find myself on that. Um, and not only that, but I have this one form of the context that I can use is the wound itself. So in my frustration or in my pain, um, if I'm feeling off or unsure uh, if I'll get there, is it something I feel? There's like yeah, the capacity to resource myself not only like within each aspect of the wheel, but also letting the core wound be a narrative that runs through it as well. Like it's almost its own version of ethos. I mean, yeah.
Can we pause the recording for just one sec?
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. And we're back uh, at just the right time. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm wondering, like, so it's interesting to think about these core wounds, and so there's another element of patience that, so we're talking about the cycles, right? We're talking about these cycles of life, of seasons, of years, and how moving through the cycles gives you you know, a better ability to ride them. But there's two things that I wanted to kind of explore with patients, and I'd love your thoughts. And like, one is that it seems like part of the wound of impatience as well is like it's a difficulty being in challenging situations, right? And being able to hold that tension. So last week we talked about how we see this pattern of people, going through the wheel and wanting to either kind of skip west and north, right? Or like start over. However that cycle actually happens, whether it's the skipping or going back. But it's like, hey, like let's splash around the ethos. That's fun. And then like, okay, we'll create a little something. All right, let's splash around the ethos a little more, but like not actually following through the process and exploring the wound and being with that. And so uh and so this this necessity of being able to weather and be in and hold that difficult time, right? Like be in the winter and be experiencing the winter, which we're not particularly good at in modern society as a whole, right? It's like nowadays we don't really deal with winter. We like sit in our homes and like turn the heat way up, right? We also don't really deal with summer. We like sit in our homes and turn the AC way up. But so weathering these difficult times. So that's the first piece that came up. And then the second question is like, with this wound, like is the power in there? It's binary opposite, right? So is the wound of, impatience, is the power there patience, or is there some other potency that's unlocked? Like to me, it doesn't always feel like it would inherently necessarily be the binary opposite.
So in the way I understand the Gene Keys kind of structure is like the city is kind of the opposite. So timelessness would be the opposite of impatience, but also it's not really the opposite. It's like a spectrum. And so you're what the gift offers is like the bridge. So if I was to look at like timelessness and impatience, I could use patience to move from one side to the other. So I'm going to have to cultivate patience in order to move out of impatience. And the more I cultivate patience by recognizing, coming into relationship with my patience, my impatience, I'm able to come closer and closer and closer to an experience that eventually will feel timeless. And I think the core wound in some way, I think, isn't just the shadow. I think the core wound is the entire spectrum. So, like to come into a physical form is a step from it steps further into time, and in that I become like time bound in lots of ways, and I have an awareness and a relationship to that timeness, and across my life, I'm coming into and cultivating a relationship that brings me back into a right relationship with my natural state, which is being a kind of and yet beyond time itself. And so the wound, the city of that awakened state, that timelessness being just as much a part of the wound. It's like a scab is still the wound.
Yeah.
And and that's kind of like the gift, almost like what's working to heal it. And then eventually maybe you have a state where it's completely gone, or maybe you have a little mark that reminds you of what was. It's not quite the same, but I think there's something, yeah, there. Um, I could also imagine how seeing things through because they're challenging can be really interesting, can be like an expression of impatience. And I think about how they have like a repressive and reactionary natures. So a repression may be, I don't start anything because um, I don't feel like I have the time to even get to it. So I'm constantly in a state of like having a bunch of things I want to be doing, but never actually doing any of them because I don't have the time to even approach them. Um, or I could start many things and not finish any of them
Yeah.
because I don't have the ability to stick with them or to see them through over time or through challenges when things get rough. Um, yeah.
So how do you feel like this, wound has manifested in uh our work? And I'm also, I want to add on to that, like also like it feels a little bit like cheating to just like use the gene keys and say
Uh-huh.
that's the wound.
A little bit.
Um, so it's like I'm curious. We can't, like, you can't unhear it, right? We can't be like, okay, well, like, erase what that is. Now let's like try another process and see if we get there. But I'm curious if like, you feel like there's some other stuff in there. But so if you want to speak to either of those, I'd love to uh, hear your thoughts.
You know, what it was coming up for me as I was like listening in, and it's like a, I think in the check-in I talked about like an inner knowing and my relationship to how do I relate to the inner knowing. I can take action on it. I can be in a state of waiting. I can do a myriad of things with that. Um, and I found the capacity to actually trust that knowing itself, which is pretty fundamental to my relationship to power and self. Um, so this core wound of impatience, and whether it be in our work and other areas of our life, it's like um, imagine. So as a timeless being, there's a lot of things that come to me or come of me that go, oh, that is true, and I know it. And then I'm looking around my material world to see where it is. And the material world, especially depending on my relationship to power and self and my ability to my other shadows or other aspects of my life, the natural patterns that are like designed in me for timing, things that come about. There's like um, there's a lot of systems at play that I may not be aware of that are having an impact uh, on me getting to the place I think I'm trying to go, in an experience that is so beyond my ability to comprehend um, its relationship to the true creative process that's happening in the universe. As an example, right? Um, so what I'm looking at is like when I was a kid, my parents told me to brush my teeth, and uh, the time it took to brush my teeth was really painful to me. I didn't want to do that, so I refused. And then when they said your teeth are not, healthy, I said I'm gonna buy dentures one day. It doesn't matter, or something like that. I don't know what my thought process was, but I already felt like my teeth were gonna fail because that was kind of the rhetoric I was hearing and the way I was interpreting it. And so if I was gonna lose my teeth at some point in time, why care for them now? Um, but that was impatience in some way. That was this. I think about that being an example of how that core wound manifests in my life. There's this thing that I know that I'm here to do. I just know within myself, like, oh, I'm going to, the thing that I want to accomplish is so great that I don't know if I've ever seen someone do it before. And I don't know what it is. I can't always name it, but I know that I'm in relationship with it. And I've learned things like this process of cultivating and transforming shadow into my gifts is required, or my relationship to an existential pain of my human existence is a part of that process. And it's
Sorry. Were you gonna go on?
I was gonna go to a thought, but I don't know where it was. So you go ahead.
I mean, it's really interesting. What you're speaking to is, uh, it's like a confusion that occurs from being able to live timelessly, right? You see what will be, and then there's a confusion as to why that isn't the situation, right? So you're like, as a kid, you're like, well, at some point, like there's a point in time where I won't have teeth, and it feels like that's already now, right? And so why are you telling me to take care of my teeth? I don't have teeth, right? Like, you're not making sense. Don't tell me to take care of something I don't have. and, and so, like, in our work, it's like recognizing this process of uh, like, well, this thing's gonna be amazing in all these ways. Like, it's going to be, this process is revolutionary and going to change the way that, people develop businesses, and, whatever it does, you feel and that. And since you're the timeless one, maybe you can speak about what it will become a little more. But then, like, people are sort of like, not, people are like, yeah, this is cool, or no, I don't really get it. And you're like, why are you not responding to this, like, amazing paradigm shattering thing?
And I say it's not even just about the feedback we receive from others. In some ways, it's like we've continued to ask ourselves, like, what form does this take?
Yeah.
And done our best, I think, to find out or align ourselves to this, like, entity or energy or ethos, and then to bring it into some kind of form, and then to allow its shadow to come out. And the shadow oftentimes just being like what we couldn't have known except for trying. Like, we couldn't have seen that the power of words, as an example, right? So, like, it's not just about the words on the page for an ethos statement, but it's actually about the coherence, or everyone coming actually into relationship with the phrase and being able to use it and have it embodied in an embodied way. I think what I feel with this and with us, ever since we met, we were like, oh, we have an ethos together, right? Like, we're in relationship to something very similar, and we watched how our lives were, kind of running parallel, or at least similar tracks. And the first thing we did was ask, like, what form does that take? And then we did it, and then we learned from it, and we saw what we couldn't have seen if we hadn't made that leap. And then we reoriented and said, okay, what now? And I think about how, like, our relationship, for me, not always in the context of every single project or work, but like the actual relationship has that quality to it for me of timelessness. Um, it it doesn't it doesn't feel bound by the normal rules that I find I have in relationships, or even in like in work relationships. That the way that we choose to relate to each other and to projects or concepts or ideas or conversations, um, um, they feel like they um, aren't even speaking about the subject matter, although they are. The subject matter may be timely, relevant to our lives, but the thing that we're wrestling with, or the things that we're in relationship with and that bring us together, feel timeless. And that space then of itself becomes that kind of same like timeless feeling, like where did the time go? Or I could play in this space for um, such a long time, or we've gone so far, or we covered so much ground, but like we didn't even expect or know or have a map that would have taken us there. And for many people and many conversations, they would never cover that ground the same way. And so that's, yeah.
And we've got those cycles too. Like sometimes we won't talk for months. And it's like, that feels fine as well when that happens.
Is that your the gift of understanding?
Maybe. Um, yeah, I was reflecting a little bit. So during the break, just to provide context, we looked up my gene key core wound, which is intolerance. And I remember, it's interesting. I remember there's a quote describing a character in a book that I read as a kid, that he had almost infinite patience, but very little tolerance. I feel kind of similar. It's like in reflecting on that, it's like if I see that it's going somewhere and I feel that it's moving, like I'll sit and I'll be with the process like as long as it takes, right? But it's like if I don't feel that, if I feel that like the person is just fundamentally like never gonna get it, or like it's just never gonna happen or whatever, I'm just like instantly like I'm done, I'm out, don't ever speak to me again, right? Like I mean, or not necessarily just people, but like, you know, things or whatever. Like it's like if I feel like it's not, if I feel that lack of alignment, it's very easy for me to just cut it. But I have a lot of patience. Like I will sit with something that I feel like it's working for a very, very, very long time. Like I'm totally fine doing that. So it's an interesting dichotomy to have uh, in the two of us. Patience versus tolerance. Patience and tolerance.
When you were describing the things that you are willing to be with in that patience, I thought about, you know, with the gift being understanding. It's, I can imagine how like if you get something, like you get why it is the way it is, then it's that that ability to invest with it or be with it over time is there. But things that don't make any sense, like is what you would cast out. Not exactly true, but I thought about how understanding something, or how gaining an understanding of something, you know, why is it this way, or does it make sense for me? Um,
Well,
allow.
it's
Oh, uh,
well, it's stuff like, you know, like helping someone with like technical issues, right? So they kind of get like one strike, right? But it's like if I'm helping someone, like if I'm like if they like keep having like technical difficulties on something, I'm like, you're just never gonna get it. You're not a tech savvy person. Like, why would I waste any of my time trying to help you? You're you're a lost cause. Like,
uh, when you look at our our work, um, do you have a sense of where, you know, intolerance, or understanding or forgiveness, you know, has um, contributed to what and where we are?
yeah, I think it's like um it was like uh it's interesting, right? Because I was sort of starting to reflect on this as we were just starting the call and thinking about sort of my process. And one of the things we spoke about last week was contamination, right? So this idea that our work was, one of the major wounds and struggles that have happened is that we've really allowed external outside influences to shape and inform what we're doing, to the extent that we haven't always allowed this thing to just grow naturally, right? And I think that's part of that is like, and part of this feels sort of like projectorness and sort of what you're talking to as well. But it's like, I want to be able to understand what this thing is, right? And put it in a box and say it. And so, like, if I'm not feeling that, and there's something else that I can like latch onto that they're like, oh, like this is what it is, I'll be like, okay, yeah, perfect. Okay, now I see it, right? I see the thing, I see the box, I understand it. I can be tolerant of it, right? I can accept it now. Whereas uh the times when it's not that, uh then um then I struggle more, right? And I was like, uh it's like I think one of the more poignant moments was that like that tension we had over like when we were on the phone, like trying to kind of build this course thing, and there was this miscommunication, and it was like, wait, you were like, wait, we're building a course, and I was like, well, of course we're building a course. That's what like this whole context has been, um, right? It's like that's me not willing to be so much in that unknown, right? Having to name, having to process ties, and uh even with this 5 week call, right? It's like after week 2 or whatever, I'm like, oh, okay, I see what process is going on. I can name it, I can box it, I can put the medicine wheel on it and see, and now I can direct us through this process. And so it's like, that's a nice skill, I think. you know I think I like having that skill. And at the same time, it's like I can recognize in this conversation that there's a piece of that that's due to intolerance of the unknown, right? Being uncomfortable being in that unknown, right? Which is what we labeled that as the fundamental skill necessary for this, whatever we're doing.
So like sometimes the intolerance isn't even about the thing in of itself, but the intolerance can be um, the intolerance to the unknown. um, so all these like these things cannot. Well, there's also forms it can take, right? Someone's tech skills is a form, but there's a not knowing like, will they ever fucking get it? And you're like, I don't even want I don't even want to try this because my after this third conversation, I'm feeling like it's a no. So there's obviously a taste there, right? There's a knowingness, there's an understanding of how to qualify people or or disqualify people probably. But it's also a yeah. I kind of feel how the intolerance, just like the impatience, can really be to the to the ephemeral in a way too. Like I'm impatient about time itself. Like time itself is painful for me, and because everything is moving in a way that feels unnatural. Because my natural state of being, what I know to be true, is that I am timeless, and so it's so uncomfortable to be bound by this thing, time.
Yeah.
um, um, and it sounds like intolerance has a similar quality. And I think about forgiveness too is interesting because it's like, what would you forgive? Not necessarily in our work, but I think about like in relationship to like the mystery, or in relationship to that yeah. I don't know exactly what my question is, but that's kind of what came up. Is like wondering how um what could you forgive, or what do you find yourself forgiving, or what do you use to see past um, the things that were once intolerable to you? If this is like a skill that can be developed in some way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting, right? So like the deepest forgiveness process that I've gone through to date is, around my mother and all of my wounding and experiences with her. Um, and um, the process in which uh, the process ultimately, I mean, it was a lot of processes, but ultimately where it landed was that, it was a removing of labels from her, right? So like I no longer internally really recognize her as like an archetypal mother figure for me, right? Like, yes, she is a person that uh, gave birth to me, and I don't like internally, she's not my mother. Um, and so I just see her as a person, right? So she's just a person that then when I see that as a person without the labels, without the prescriptions of, okay, well, she was supposed to do this, and here's this and that, it's a person, then I can have a lot of compassion for her, and I can also actively choose without um, basically without kind of conditioning or should responses. I can choose how I want to engage with that person, right? So it's like the the forgiveness kind of like it's a stripping away of like entitlement, right? It's like because that's like the wound when I feel like you know you feel entitled to an experience from someone, right? So it's like in general we feel entitled for people to be generally pleasant and nice to us, right? So then when you're walking down the street and you accidentally bump into someone or something and they're like, "Hey, fuck you." You're like, that offends you, right? You're offended, and that process requires forgiven because your your expectation of the way in which they should behave towards you, the behavior that you're entitled to receive from them was not met, and so that process requires forgiveness. And so a dropping away of that self-entitlement and those roles that we put on people allows forgiveness to happen much easier, and then tolerance happens much uh much easier, right? Because it's like it's much easier to be tolerant of an individual than someone who's playing a role in your life. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like really emotionally triggering um, kind of contemplation. Um, it brings up a lot of things about today with Ka, and just uh,
Yeah, I mean, the deeper you know uh the deeper you engage in relationship with someone, the closer you are to them, the more those roles you know overlay, right? uh and that's actually a big part of the hypno journey work, is finding those archetypes, right? Because most of the roles, the major ones, it's these archetypal needs that we're getting filled, right? The need for an archetypal mate or other, right? The need for an archetypal mother, archetypal father, right? So we've got these archetypal needs, and we try to fill them with people, right? And so the hypno journey process is, well, you find internal resources that are perfect matches of those archetypes, and you fill them that way, and then some of those pieces fall away. Um, but yeah, it's a process.
I think about how so if you have this experience of finding that um, uh, archetypal form within yourself, and therefore um, the need to have it uh, be projected by or on someone else, um, let's say, um, is no longer there, or at least the power of that diminishes in some way. Not that happens or not, but I can just imagine how it's like. So the entrepreneur's journey of maybe you no, that's not the story. What I was kind of feeling was like, well, if I recognize that I can be provider, and therefore like my looking for provider as in an archetypal form goes away, but the person that once had that projection is lifted, so now I'm like in this very new experience of them.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I think we did it in your journey. I'm trying to remember, but I think we replaced your dad.
yeah, we
Yeah.
we did dad, and then also like an environment too, right? So the archetype of womb was there as well.
Yeah. So yeah, so I mean, you've got a direct experience of what that process looks like. But yeah, it's like it's the process of inner resourcing. Um, sorry, I kind of interrupted your train a little bit. I mean, you're saying like so entrepreneur,
Mm.
provider.
Yeah,
You're speaking to that.
I didn't like that story.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I feel that I feel that as you talked about forgiveness, I thought about the importance of finding and doing that forgiving inside of myself has been a process that I've had. So can I bring forgiveness or bring patience, or a sense of timelessness into my relationship to myself, uh, as well as those around me or something like my work, but that cultivation inside being really critical. So like with family, for me as well, like forgiveness, like forgiving them within me, and then allowing them to be who they are. And because I have that sense of understanding that uh, you'll never be that archetype, because it's it's um, it's it's not who you actually are.
Yeah.
In these ways, just like I've had to come to that within myself as well. So I think about something like stereotypes or archetypes or different types that I meet in the world, and I go, oh, I have to be that. Like when I realized I wasn't ever going to be a 55-year-old white man who ran a company, I was like, wow, like that's a really interesting form to hold in my imagination for what I'll one day be. Um,
Yeah.
so what do I do now with that space? I'm feeling that I'm feeling like something that is similar between impatience and intolerance. Um, just like it.
Well, I mean, I think it's this unique uh um uh it's it's this like I think it's as similar as this like unique inability to effectively be in the space of the formlessness, right? And we ask, I mean, oof, we've been asking this question of like, well, why can't we get this thing to come to form, right? And so maybe it's that, well, because we're not able to effectively hold the space of formlessness, right? We're not effectively able to hold the space of formlessness for it, right? It's like hold this space where like uh well, it's not quite it's not quite formlessness actually. I think that's the wrong word. It's this coming into beingness, right? So like how I was seeing it is like it's like if for me the structure is like, well, it isn't anything but exploration, formlessness. Okay, that's fine. I can be in that, right? And uh and if I've got a form that I can put it in, okay, I'm good with that. But it's like between the two, this like space of it like coming into form is like, I think that's when I become intolerant of it. And I think for you as well, that's where the impatience like triggers highly as well, because you're like, why aren't you better? Why aren't you what I see you will be? Right. Um, yeah. So that's my thought, but I'd love your perspectives too.
I'm like I'm really feeling this conversation in the sense of it really is eliciting a lot of emotions in my heart and my solar plexus. I can just feel them. Like I'm trying to get to the mind to use my words, and
That's good. Most people struggle going the other way, so it's a good problem to have.
I'm I'm feeling into like um the like you put something into form and then it almost attracts all the things that are related to it in some way. Like I think what keeps coming up is just from this with Ka, I'm processing like I am really secure in what I said. And I'm also really secure in the possibility for what form we step into. But when I do look at my own shadow of impatience, I am met with the question of timing. So what things are up for me right now in my life and in my experience that would lead me to move impatiently versus to be patient? Or how can I honor and recognize the depth of the patience that has been present, and have this almost security of having chosen the right time or right way, or even chosen the right option of like picking a new form as a solution. So let me try again. It's like there's the process of the becoming of a form, and not just being the inception or the prototype, right? But it's got a lifespan. And for me right now, looking at relationships being very similar. So a container or a partnership is a form, and it's like, how do I? What is there for me as that deeply knows what something needs to look like, because of that timeless perspective and understanding, and the capacity or scale to be with the material reality or the process of it coming into itself. There's a sense of like I mentioned responsibility earlier, but like it's like if I do know what you're capable of and you're not there yet, it's very frustrating in a lot of ways. And it's not that I don't, it's not that I can't see things for what they are now. And it's not that I need, but it's also like I can, um, hmm, what am I trying? It's like the responsibility of informing of the space between, um, to speak from a timeless perspective and yet have it be bound in time and form and particular context in a way that actually helps to drive its development toward evolution itself. And then maybe claiming a lot of power and a lot of influence or an understanding, but it feels like that's like in the gene keys, like on a sixth line, so it's like principles or ethics, right? It's higher order aspects of what a creative process looks like. And so in any form that I'm in relationship with, there is a timeless knowing of the principle that is fractured and fractaled in a very particular individuated form. So there's an inherent incompleteness, an inherent woundedness, an inherent relationship to time that says I am developing. And in some way, all those things are like my vocation is to see those things and to skillfully be in relationship with that distortion or that discontinuity or that the potential polarity of seeing or feeling or knowing that. I just feel like this guttural or like heart-based, like I feel the wound. um, I feel that even if I know in some ways what it is, there's this patience with my own process of coming into form in time that is I would say one of the underlying challenges of the things we talked about is my own patience with coming into relationship with the timelessness of my being.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it feels like, um, if we're looking at, the struggle, archetypal wound, of us combined, it is in this struggle uh, um, of holding that tension of like allowing this thing to come into form in the ways that it needs to, and holding the right amount of structure to allow that, right? um, and it's like, uh, it's difficult, right? And it's like, because in that, it's like, oh, on one hand, we've got the like, the like, you've seen, it is and can be and already is going to be this in the timelessness. So why is it so squishy and not functional right now, right? It's like little baby child, right? Well, one day you're going to be a Olympic athlete. Why aren't you pole vaulting right now? And then my wanting to really define and name and categorize. So it's like, and so that's like, it's a really tension filled space, I think for many, and for us in particular, and particularly with what we're trying to build, right? Because we're trying to allow something new to come into form. Not like we're like, oh, we're opening a a shoe shop, right? So like, we know what that looks like. Those exist in the world. Whatever we're doing does not exist in this world, right? Yet.
Mm-hmm.
Although it already does, sort of, right, Justin? But like, then the gift there is like, if we can own that and move through that wounding and embrace that power, like our ability to hold that space for others, right? To actually hold that space and to allow, because that's a lot of what we've talked about, and a lot of what we've pointed to is like, a lot of the problems with businesses in the world is this divine inspiration comes down, and it's received by someone, and they immediately put it into okay, this is what this is, and here's how my ego wants to run with it, and they start running with it, and then they start running with it and causing harm, right? They're causing harm, or they're not they're not uplifting the planet in the way that it could. And so if we can do this for ourselves, our power to allow and expand and hold that space to allow that beautiful combination of the divine inspiration and the human creation to create something will be unparalleled.
Yeah, yeah. I want to like lift up the um the organizational aspect of that, um, and also the you know so collective organization, but also individual organization. So
Mm-hmm.
your capacity or my capacity to organize and be with these things, and then to be able to do that together, is feels very fundamental, or foundational. And I think about that whole idea of this kind of skills tree development? How do you navigate uncertain times? And there's actually a skills tree that exists in a way, right? To be able to um, know where you are and what could be useful here. Um, you know, we in a way we've been doing that, and there's what I'm feeling is like a cuspiness, not of actually understanding what we have decided on. Not necessarily like what the project is, but what things have we agreed to? What things have we experienced collectively? And kind of getting understanding or coherence around those experiences that actually um, speak to the form or the relationship that we're in. Um, um, I think about the um, the riskiness of deciding that the thing that you do will be of you. Um, and um, I think it's maybe with intolerance and impatience, it can be easy to um, uh, miss just how substantial or significant that a risk is. And I think about risk, it's not just to like our daily lives, but it's risk to our ego. It's risk to our sense of self. It's risk to the safety of like a lot of the narratives or stories that we've held about a lot of things. They're brought up. Um, um, in some way, I couldn't imagine a more rich fertilizer for something to grow out of. Um,
All the pieces of you that die.
yeah, pretty much. Um, yeah.
Well, we're coming up on
Yeah, I feel
two out
complete-ish.
2 hours. Yeah, and I feel like we're coming to completeness. I think this was a really interesting, for sure, our mushiest one.
Hmm.
Um,
Hey, oh, do you want to do checkouts?
is there
Is that
anything else that needs to be said into the space?
I was just noticing the way the creative tension felt in this conversation. And I noticed this is kind of a checkout, but also just a reflection is when that tension of not knowing where I'm going or where we're going, and not knowing what was adequate or right to share into that. Um, one, it created the insecurity, but I could think about how this is actually a great example of impatience, where this creative process of conversation can look a lot of different ways. And one of those ways is like structured or downloading. And so you and I, we just talk from the things that we know, and maybe some culmination of those things gets us to something. But in this call, um, there was a lot of turning over of uh, like asking and listening into and actually kind of co-creating shared understandings of things like words like forgiveness or patience, and that process in and of itself I felt like was the um, it made this really risky, and I think it made it probably I was imagining what it's like to watch this, and I don't it kind of makes me cringe if I'm being honest. Um, and how uh, to actually be in relationship with your wound, um, and your concepts or your stories around it, right? Um, uh, that's what I felt here. Uh, I felt my wound embodied, and I felt the freshness of where it was, open or being experienced, as well as how I could, um, like, what it's like to be in like a resilient relationship with it, um, as it as it as it as a tool or as a portal or pathway or direction toward uh, creation. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the process, right? Digging into it, exploring the stories, trying to unravel the stories, and somehow, some way, somewhere, the the golden compass reveals itself.
and yet it feels different from gathering user stories and not knowing exactly where what a prototype's going to look like, but having a series, like a design sprint. There's some of this there, but yet there's something that's like uh maybe does and will inform this continually, and also this compass is um, uh, like and not that. I wouldn't even say it's of that. Maybe it's of a former archetype that's similar, but it's like a um, there's something
Similar to what?
similar to like a design sprint. You're just talking about the like to you named it like a compass. You said something about like using stories and then looking at the stories to be able to um, I won't quote it right, but um, to kind of come into this kind of creation or to have this compass come out, and I guess my mind jumped to what it was like to come up with to like have the understanding of design thinking in of itself,
Yeah.
right? So there's obviously the sprint, but there's also this the idea of human centered design changed the way people were working in the design world and product or software or marketing. And there's something that is similar here, right? When you're describing the compass, that's what came up for me, and I go, okay, yeah. It's like a new way of thinking, and it will most likely build a compass of sorts. We're kind of seeing that come into form, um, and yet because it's not that, and we know that. I'm really interested to see what that thing is. Um, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I was actually pointing at, which is slightly different, is that, and maybe ultimately it's not that different, but with our wounds in particular, we craft a lot of stories to protect them, right? To basically, we craft a lot of stories to keep us from looking at and exploring and healing our wounds, right? And so through this process, there's an ultimate dismantling of story that has to occur, right? We've sat and, you know, told story about our wounds on this, and at the same time it's not something that can really be storied out of, right? So it's understanding the stories, speaking to the stories, and then kind of moving through and past those to see what the stories are actually hiding, right? Tell a story. Oh, well, my wound's this. Okay. Well, that's not actually it, but that's the story you're telling to protect what your wound is. You want to do checkout? You want to go first, or shall I?
You can go first.
Okay. Yeah. I'm feeling good. I think I would like mirror a lot of, what you said, and sort of like there's an element of kind of like, well, something happened here. I'm not totally sure what. I'm not sure what the experience of watching this video would be like. Yeah, we're a little all over the place, a little like in it. And I think it's like, this is, this is the process, and this is what it looks like. And I think it's starting to come in and explore. And I'm really, really excited to see how this settles, and keep moving through the process. And maybe even, I'm really interested to explore this space of holding enough structure to allow what needs to be created without overly defining and contaminating it. And I'm wondering if that's what we're doing now, if that's what this 5-week process is, or if there's something more required. But I'm curious to see what exploring that looks like. And yeah, I'm grateful that you showed up today in a really beautiful, vulnerable way. And so thank you for showing up and being willing to work with this intense emotions. So yeah, feeling gratitude, feeling good, and curious to see what comes up in Justin's closing, particularly because he usually draws some cool cards.
Am I going to pull cards today? I don't know.
You don't have to.
I will. Yeah, things feel very, this conversation felt very close. And to talk about the wound and then to feel it and to stay open and in communication with that. Again, it feels like another kind of testament, but also a possible lens or understanding to be explored that says, well, why is this possible with us? And it's not only a question like why is it possible with us, but it's like a recognition of the significance or the success or um, the value of just those moments in a creative process, or of this creative process, or as creative processes like, of themselves. So while there's like a larger arc or journey that we're on, there's this there's all these moments where things come together in new and novel ways within me or within you, it seems like, or within us, and that's yeah, I guess an honoring of that. I don't know what this is, what it is that we are. Um, one of the things I was excited about with this kind of these conversations was that we were deeply open to them being in any way that they could look any way that felt right, and the intention behind them was to have them. And it just so happened that on week 2, not just so happened, but we picked up or week 1 we had this you had the idea of the compass, and we started exploring that, and I was like, okay, let's follow that through a little bit more. And now on week 3 we approached the wound, and we touch this place, and we see this experience of the wheel in a way that hasn't even been a part of our offerings in the past, and isn't deeply aligned to the timeline and flow of this 5-week exploration that we're on. And so what I'm, again, like, yeah, I have questions about how valuable this content will be as far as like visually appealing or like not painful to even listen to it in a way, because it doesn't offer information in a normal way, and yet there is like this this experience is really one of things emerging, us coming into relationship with that emergence, and um, and then deciding how or who we want to be in that relationship. And I, for me, that's where I'm most learning. Um, I am, let's say, in these spaces, I do feel timeless. And I feel like what we're wrestling with or talking about or discussing are things that have been talked about across humanity, and actually are in some way speaking about universal principles. um, and I'm gaining this skill set of confidence and understanding of being with the discomfort of something coming into form or form developing in time. And so I can look at how this learning experience, learning arc, um, is deeply personal, aligned to my skills, and hopefully whatever the outcome or whatever this thing that is, allows this to almost like to ask another question, to pose another opportunity for learning in this like individuating way. Does that make sense? Kind of. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I'll go with it.
Yeah. Yeah, there may be a couple loons out there who will want to experience this journey of ours once we've gone on it. We'll
This is our
get like,
prototype.
yeah, we'll get like 5 foot views on YouTube.
Cool. Complete.
What'd you draw?
Mm. 4 cups in reverse, luxury. So it's kind of like luxury can feel really great, but it's actually kind of like a stagnating experience. So everything is calm and safe, but that is not what we're in. We're moving out of a space of luxury. We're moving into the possibility. Actually, we moved from that into 6 of Cups, which is pleasure, and so it's like fulfillment and flowing. And the Ace of Cups was in reverse, which for me is like a reminder that we're not actually starting from this like a new emotional space, but we're actually speaking about things that have been alive in ourselves and we've done work with. And we're moving from the Ace of Cups into the Ace of Discs. So you're moving from that emotional feeling, you know, easily moved nature to a grounded, solid foundation of a material possibility. Is what's here. So I think that narrative makes sense. Last card is actually the Prince of Wands in reverse, which is like, this is what process we're in. And it's okay to not feel the pressure of passion. You can know it and you can have it be present, that fiery wands, young prince energy, but there's no need to be carried away by it. If anything, it actually speaks to maybe what this process looks like. It's being with it's being passionate, but doing it in a way that is not consumed or lost by the fire. It's got much more of that cups or watery quality to it.
Well, the one last funny thing that came up for me, I don't know why it came up as you were speaking, but I mean, I've always been opposed to the idea that like competition really actually exists, but I don't think we have to worry about NDAs and people stealing our idea.
No.
This is so deeply personal that, I mean, hell, everyone should do this, but I don't think anyone can come steal this.
I think that's one of the foundational points is that for us and for this work, there's a sense that there's something that only we can uniquely do. And we've explored in many ways what that looks like. And now we're approaching it from a different perspective, which is like, who are we as this creator? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Okay. I'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. You want to stop the recording?